The metallic clang of rifle stocks against concrete echoed through the armory as Sergeant Maya Chun finished her inventory, her precise movements reflecting years of military discipline. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the weapon racks that lined the sterile room like steel sentinels. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself invisible, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, her uniform impeccable despite the late hour. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The scent of gun oil and metal polish filled her nostrils as she checked each serial number against her clipboard, her pen scratching against the paper with mechanical rhythm. Outside, the desert wind rattled the small windows near the ceiling, carrying with it the distant sounds of the military base settling into evening routine. Somewhere in the corridors beyond, boots echoed against polished floors, voices called out good nights, and doors slammed shut with the finality of another day survived. Maya had volunteered for the late inventory shift again. It was the third time this week, and Corporal Davies had given her a questioning look when she'd signed up on the duty roster. But Maya preferred the solitude of these evening hours, when the armory belonged to her alone, when she could work without the weight of eyes following her every movement, without the whispered comments that had become as constant as her own heartbeat. The M4 carbines hung in perfect rows, their black polymer and steel surfaces reflecting the overhead lights like dark mirrors. Each weapon told a story, the slight wear on a grip where nervous hands had clutched too tightly during training exercises, the microscopic scratches that spoke of desert operations and careful maintenance. Maya knew these weapons better than she knew most people on the base. They were predictable, reliable, honest in their construction and purpose. Her fingers traced the inventory sheet, marking off serial numbers with practiced efficiency. Weapon after weapon, box after box of ammunition, each piece of equipment accounted for and secured. This was order. This was control. This was the kind of environment where Maya Chun had learned to thrive, where her attention to detail and unwavering dedication had earned her the respect of some and the resentment of others. The door opened behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss, and Maya didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. She had developed an instinct for danger, a sixth sense, honed by months of navigating the complex social battlefield that was military life. The footsteps were too heavy for Davies, too confident for any of the junior enlisted personnel, and there was something in the way they moved across the floor, purposeful, predatory, that made her shoulders tense despite her efforts to remain calm. Working late again, Sergeant Chun? The voice belonged to Captain Marcus Steele, and it carried that particular tone that Maya had learned to recognize, the one that suggested concern while hiding something else entirely underneath. She continued checking her inventory, her pen moving steadily across the paper, though her grip had tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just finishing up the quarterly count, sir," Maya replied without turning around, her voice professionally neutral. She had perfected this tone over months of practice, respectful enough to avoid direct confrontation, distant enough to discourage further conversation. The scent of the captain's cologne mixed with the oil and metal in the air, something expensive and cloying that seemed out of place in the utilitarian environment of the armory. Captain Steele moved closer, his boots clicking against the concrete floor with measured steps. Maya could feel his presence behind her like heat from a fire, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. She reached for the next weapon on the rack, a sniper rifle that required careful handling, using the moment to create distance between them while maintaining the pretense of normal duty. "You know, Maya, Sergeant Chun, I've been meaning to talk to you." The slip into her first name was intentional, she knew. A small boundary crossed to test her reaction. "Your performance evaluations are coming up, and there are some things we should discuss." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, wrapped in official language and delivered with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Maya had seen this same conversation play out with other women on the base, had watched careers stalled and dreams crushed under the weight of performance issues that materialized whenever someone refused to play along with the unwritten rules of accommodation. "My performance metrics are all within regulation standards, sir," Maya responded, setting down her clipboard and turning to face him directly. She had learned that showing fear only encouraged men like Captain Steele, that the appearance of confidence was sometimes the only weapon available to her. Her dark eyes met his directly, searching for any sign of his true intentions while maintaining the facade of professional courtesy. Captain Steele was a large man, built like the college linebacker he had been before joining the military. His dress uniform was always immaculate, his ribbons and decorations arranged with parade ground precision, his sandy hair perpetually styled to regulation perfection. He had the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no, from moving through a world that bent itself around his desires and ambitions. "Standards can be subjective," he said, moving to the side to partially block her path to the door. It was a subtle movement, but Maya caught it immediately. Her training kicked in automatically: assess the threat, identify escape routes, calculate options for defense. The armory suddenly felt smaller, the weapons on the walls both reassuring in their presence and useless in their locked and secured state. The fluorescent lights hummed louder in the silence that followed, and Maya became acutely aware of every detail in the room. The way the shadows fell between the weapon racks, creating pools of darkness where someone could hide. The distance to the door, 12 feet, maybe 13. The heavy steel tables that could provide cover or obstacles, depending on the situation. The small windows near the ceiling that offered no realistic escape route. "I think there might be some misunderstanding, sir," Maya said carefully, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in your office tomorrow, during regular hours." "Captain." Steele smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in, Sergeant. See, there have been some complaints about your attitude. Some concerns about your ability to work as part of a team." Maya's jaw tightened slightly. She knew exactly what he meant. By team player, it was the same language that had been used to pressure Corporal Rodriguez before she'd transferred out. The same veiled threats that had preceded Staff Sergeant Williams's sudden decision to leave the military entirely. It was a well-practiced system of control, as precise and deadly as any weapon in the armory. "What kind of complaints, sir?" Maya asked, though she already knew there had been no official complaints. This was about power and control, about a man who had grown accustomed to getting what he wanted and had decided that she would be his next conquest. "The kind that could affect your career trajectory," Captain Steele replied, moving another step closer. Now he was less than arm's length away, close enough that Maya could see the small scar on his chin from some long-ago injury, close enough to smell the coffee on his breath, mixed with something sharper, alcohol. She realized with growing alarm. Maya's mind raced through her options. She could try to leave, but he was partially blocking the door, and making a scene could be turned against her later. She could report this conversation, but it would be his word against hers, and she had seen how those battles typically ended. She could try to de-escalate, to find some middle ground that would allow both of them to save face, but every instinct told her that Captain Steele had moved beyond the point where reasonable compromise was possible. The weight of her service. Pistol pressed against her hip, secured in its holster, and utterly useless in this situation. Using a weapon against a superior officer would end her career and probably her freedom, regardless of the circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on her. Surrounded by enough firepower to level a building, yet completely defenseless against the particular threat she was facing. "I'm not sure what you want from me, sir," Maya said, hating how the words sounded even as she spoke them. It was a lie, of course. She knew exactly what he wanted, had seen the looks he'd been giving her. for weeks, had noticed how he found excuses to be present during her training exercises and duty assignments. Captain Steele reached out and placed his hand on the weapon rack beside her head, effectively trapping her between his body and the cold metal of the rifles. The gesture was casual, almost accidental, but Maya could see the calculation behind it. This was a man who had perfected the art of creating situations that could be explained away later, encounters that would sound perfectly innocent when described in official reports. "I think you know exactly what I want," he said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "The question is whether you're smart enough to understand how this works. Play along, and your career continues to flourish. Make things difficult, and you might find that military life becomes challenging." The threat hung in the air between them like cordite smoke after a firefight. Maya felt her breathing slow, her vision sharpen, her body preparing for conflict in the way that years of training had programmed into her reflexes. She had faced enemy fire in 2 combat deployments, had stared down insurgents and survived IED explosions, but this felt different. This was a betrayal that cut deeper than enemy bullets, a violation of the trust that was supposed to exist between soldiers. "Captain Steele," Maya said, her voice carrying a new edge that she hoped he would recognize as a warning. "I need to finish this inventory and file my report. Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time." But even as she spoke, Maya could see that he had moved beyond the point of listening to reason. There was something in his eyes now, a kind of hunger that she had seen before in combat zones, the look of someone who had decided that rules no longer applied to them. That power gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. The Armory felt like a tomb around them, sealed and isolated from the rest of the world. Maya realized with growing clarity that Captain Steele had chosen this location deliberately. The Armory was soundproofed, designed to contain the noise of weapons testing and maintenance. No one would hear her if she called for help. No one would accidentally interrupt what he had planned. Outside, the base continued its evening routine, unaware of the drama unfolding in the sterile room beneath their feet. Soldiers were settling into their bunks, writing letters home, playing cards in the common areas, living their lives in the assumption that their comrades could be trusted, that the system that governed their daily existence was fundamentally just and protective. Maya thought of her younger sister back home in California, of the pride in her parents' voices when they talked about their daughter, the soldier, their daughter who had chosen to serve her country. She thought of the oath she had taken, the promise to defend and protect, and wondered how those words applied when the threat came from within, when the very system she had sworn to uphold had turned against her. The inventory clipboard lay forgotten. On the metal table beside them, its neat columns of numbers and serial codes, a testament to the order and discipline that Maya had believed defined military life. Now it seemed like a relic from a more innocent time, when she had still believed that competence and dedication were enough to earn respect and protection. Captain Steele moved closer still, and Maya could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the expectation in his eyes that she would simply submit to his will. He had probably never been refused, had never encountered a situation where his rank and position weren't enough to guarantee compliance. Maya realized that what happened in the next few moments would define not just her own future, but possibly the future of every woman who served under his command. The question that hung in the air between them wasn't really about her career or her performance evaluations. It was about power and consent, about whether the uniform she wore afforded her any protection against predators who had learned to camouflage their intentions behind military protocol and institutional authority. Maya Chun had joined the military to serve something larger than herself, to be part of an organization built on honor and mutual respect. Now, trapped between cold steel and hot ambition, she faced a moment that would test everything she believed about courage, justice, and the price of standing up for what was right. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the human. drama unfolding beneath them, while somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut with the hollow echo of opportunity lost, or perhaps, Maya thought with grim determination, opportunity about to be seized. Maya Chun had never planned to become a soldier. Growing up in a small California town where the most exciting event was the annual Strawberry Festival, military service had seemed as foreign and distant as space travel. Her parents, first-generation immigrants who had built a modest life running a small grocery store, had dreams for their daughter that involved college degrees and corporate offices, not combat boots and rifle ranges, but Maya had always been drawn to order, to systems that made sense and rules that applied equally to everyone. In high school, while her classmates navigated the complex social hierarchies of teenage life, Maya found comfort in the precision of mathematics and the clear logic of computer programming. She was the girl who organized study groups and color-coded her notes, who stayed after school to help younger students with their homework, not because she was particularly social, but because helping others felt like contributing to something larger than herself. The decision to enlist came during her sophomore year of college, after watching news coverage of a terrorist attack that had claimed the lives of 3 young women, who reminded her of her sister. Maya had stared at their photographs on the television screen, bright faces full of potential, dreams cut short by senseless violence, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. The world was dangerous and chaotic, but there were people willing to stand between that chaos and the innocent. Maya wanted to be one of those people. Her parents had been devastated. Her mother, Elena, had cried for 3 days straight, alternating between Spanish prayers and English pleas for her daughter to reconsider. Her father, David, had retreated into silence, spending long hours in the store's back office doing inventory that didn't need to be done, his disappointment hanging over the family like fog rolling in from the Pacific. "You could do anything," her mother had said during their final argument before Maya left for basic training. "Doctor, lawyer, engineer. Why do you want to throw your life away playing soldier?" Maya had tried to explain about duty and service, about wanting to protect the life her parents had built for their family, but the words had sounded hollow even to her own ears. How do you explain the pull of something you don't fully understand? Yourself? How do you justify choosing uncertainty and danger over safety and success? Basic training had been a revelation. For the first time in her life, Maya found herself in an environment where her natural inclination toward discipline and attention to detail were not just appreciated, but essential for survival. She excelled at the physical challenges, her small frame and runner's endurance serving her well in long marches and obstacle courses. But more than that, she thrived in the structured environment where everyone started from zero and earned their place through effort and determination. Staff Sergeant Morrison, their drill instructor, had singled Maya out during the 3rd week of training. "Chun," he had barked across the parade ground, front and center. Maya had double-timed it to his position, her heart hammering with the assumption that she had made some mistake, violated some protocol she didn't understand. "You know why I called you up here, recruit?" Morrison had asked, his weathered face giving nothing away. "No, Staff Sergeant," Maya had replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "Because you're the first one in your platoon to clean your weapon properly without being told twice. Because you helped recruit Johnson with his Foot Locker inspection, even though it meant staying up past lights out. Because you understand that this isn't about you, it's about the soldier next to you." That conversation had changed everything for Maya. She realized that military service wasn't just about following orders or carrying weapons. It was about being part of something larger than individual ambition, about creating bonds of trust and mutual support that could mean the difference between life and death. Her first deployment to Afghanistan had tested those bonds in ways that no training exercise could simulate. Maya remembered the weight of her gear during those endless patrols through mountain villages, the constant awareness that danger could materialize from any shadow or doorway. But she also remembered the moment when Corporal Williams had pulled her behind cover during a firefight. The way his body had shielded hers from flying debris. The absolute trust they had developed in each other's competence and commitment. That deployment had also shown Maya the complicated realities of military life for women. She had learned to navigate the delicate balance between being competent enough to earn respect and not so competent as to threaten the egos of insecure men. She had developed an internal radar for detecting which colleagues could be trusted and which ones saw her gender as either a weakness to be protected or an opportunity to be exploited. The assault had happened during her second deployment in a forward operating base in Iraq, where the lines between friend and foe were often blurred by the complexity of urban warfare. Maya had been returning from a night patrol when Sergeant First Class Martinez had cornered her in the equipment shed. He had been drinking, despite regulations, and his hands had been rough and insistent as he pressed her against the canvas wall of the temporary structure. Maya had fought back immediately, her training overriding her shock. A knee to the groin, an elbow to the ribs, a heel stomp to the instep. Martinez had released her with a string of curses, clutching his injured anatomy while Maya had grabbed the nearest weapon, a shovel, and held it like a club while backing toward the exit. "You tell anyone about this, and I'll make sure you never see promotion again," Martinez had gasped, his threat delivered between waves of pain. Maya had reported the incident anyway, following proper channels and filing the appropriate paperwork. The investigation had lasted 3 weeks and concluded with Martinez receiving a letter of reprimand for conduct unbecoming, while Maya found herself transferred to a different unit with a notation in her file about personality conflicts with supervisory personnel. The transfer had been presented as a lateral move, an opportunity for professional development. But Maya understood the real message. Victims who reported assaults were troublemakers who created problems for unit cohesion. Better to move them quietly than to deal with the messy complications of accountability and justice. That experience had taught Maya to be constantly vigilant, to trust her instincts about dangerous situations and dangerous people. She learned to position herself strategically in rooms, to avoid being alone with certain colleagues, to develop networks of support among other women who understood the unique challenges of military service. Now, 3 years later, Maya had earned her sergeant's stripes through competence and determination. She specialized in weapons maintenance and inventory control, finding satisfaction in the precise technical requirements of keeping complex systems operational. Her performance evaluations were consistently excellent, her fitness scores in the top 10% of her unit, her leadership potential noted by multiple superior officers, but she had also learned to recognize the signs of predatory behavior. The subtle ways that some men use their authority to create situations where women had no good options. Captain Steele had been displaying those signs for weeks, the lingering looks during briefings, the unnecessary physical proximity during equipment inspections, the casual comments about her appearance that skirted the line of professional propriety. Maya had tried the usual strategies for managing unwanted attention. She volunteered for assignments that kept her away from the captain's direct supervision. She made sure to have witnesses present during any required interactions. She documented concerning incidents in a private journal, creating a paper trail that might be useful if things escalated to the point where formal complaints became necessary. But she had also seen how formal complaints typically played out. The military justice system was designed by men, administered by men, and generally more concerned with protecting institutional reputation than individual victims. Women who complained about harassment often found themselves facing counter-accusations of unprofessional conduct, poor performance, or inability to handle the demands of military service. Maya's living situation reflected her careful approach to personal security. Her barracks room was Spartan but strategically arranged, bed positioned to face the door, personal items secured in locked containers, a small mirror positioned to provide early warning of anyone approaching from the Hallway. She kept her service pistol cleaned and ready, even though regulations required it to be stored unloaded. Except during specific duties, her daily routine had become a careful dance of visibility and protection. Maya made sure to eat meals in the common dining facility where there were always witnesses present. She conducted her physical training in groups rather than alone, even though she preferred the solitude of solo runs. She volunteered for duties that kept her occupied during evening hours when supervision was lighter and inappropriate behavior was more likely to occur. The other women on base had formed an informal network of mutual support and information sharing. They warned each other about officers with reputations for inappropriate behavior, shared strategies for avoiding compromising situations, and provided alibis and witnesses when needed. It was a shadow system of protection that operated parallel to the official chain of command, necessary because the official system had proven inadequate for ensuring their safety. Maya's relationship with her family had grown strained as the realities of military life became clear to her. During video calls home, she found it increasingly difficult to maintain the cheerful facade that her parents expected. How do you explain to civilian family members that the organization they think is protecting you has become a source of constant vigilance and stress? How do you describe living in a state of perpetual readiness for conflict, not with foreign enemies, but with your own colleagues? Her mother had begun asking pointed questions about when Maya planned to leave the military and return to civilian life. "You've served your country," Alina would say during their weekly calls. "You've proven whatever you needed to prove. When are you coming home?" But Maya wasn't ready to give up on the ideals that had drawn her to military service in the first place. Despite the challenges and disappointments, she still believed in the mission, still felt pride in wearing the uniform, still wanted to be part of an organization dedicated to protecting something larger than individual interests. The contradiction created a constant tension in Maya's daily life. She loved the precision and teamwork required for successful military operations, the satisfaction of mastering complex technical skills, the bonds of trust that developed between soldiers who depended on each other for survival. But she also lived with the knowledge that some of her colleagues saw her not as a fellow warrior, but as a target of opportunity, a challenge to be conquered rather than a comrade to be respected. Maya's personal relationships had suffered under the weight of constant vigilance. She had learned to be guarded even with people she liked and trusted, always aware that today's friend might become tomorrow's threat if circumstances changed. The emotional armor required for survival in a hostile environment made it difficult to form the kind of deep connections that sustained most people through difficult times. Her few close friendships were with other women who understood the unique pressures of their situation. Corporal Sarah Davies, who worked in communications, had become something like a sister to Maya. They looked out for each other, shared information about potential threats, and provided emotional support during the worst moments of doubt and frustration. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to have a job where I didn't have to worry about being cornered in supply closets, Sarah had confided during one of their late-night conversations in Maya's room. Or where my performance evaluations were actually based on my performance. Maya had replied, understanding exactly what her friend meant. But both women had also invested too much in their military careers to walk away easily. They had fought too hard for respect and recognition to abandon their positions, without exhausting every possible avenue for reform and improvement. They believed, perhaps naively, that their persistence and professionalism might eventually create change that would benefit the women who came after them. Maya's personal philosophy had evolved to emphasize self-reliance and strategic thinking. She studied martial arts manuals and practiced defensive techniques in her spare time. She maintained peak physical condition, not just to meet military standards, but to ensure she could handle physical confrontations if they became necessary. She read extensively about leadership and conflict resolution, preparing herself for the day when she might have enough rank and influence to create positive change from within the system. The approach required constant energy and attention, but it had also given Maya a sense of agency in situations where many other women felt powerless. She refused to see herself as a victim, even when placed in victimizing circumstances. Every challenge was a test to be passed, every threat an opportunity to demonstrate strength and resilience. This mindset had served Maya well through 3 years of active duty, but it had also isolated her emotionally from many of the people around her. Constant readiness for conflict made it difficult to relax and enjoy the camaraderie that should have been one of the benefits of military service. Maya found herself analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings and potential dangers, unable to take people at face value or trust in their good intentions. The isolation was particularly acute during off-duty hours when other soldiers were socializing and building the informal relationships that often proved crucial for career advancement. Maya's cautious approach to personal interactions meant that she missed out on many of the mentorship opportunities and professional networks that helped ambitious soldiers advance through the ranks. But Maya had concluded that survival was more important than advancement, that protecting her physical and emotional integrity was worth the professional costs. She had seen too many women compromise their values in pursuit of acceptance and opportunity, only to find themselves trapped in situations where their choices became increasingly limited and their options for escape narrowed with each passing month. Now, standing in the armory with Captain Steele's intentions becoming unmistakably clear, Maya realized that all of her careful preparation and strategic thinking had led to this moment. Everything she had learned about reading situations and managing threats would be tested in the next few minutes. The skills she had developed through years of vigilance and self-protection would determine not just her immediate safety, but her future ability to serve with dignity and integrity. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath them, while Maya Chun prepared to discover whether her years of preparation would be sufficient for the challenge that was about to unfold. Captain Steele stepped closer, his hands sliding from the weapon rack to rest against the wall beside Maya's head, effectively caging her between his body and the cold metal of the rifles. The gesture was calculated, practiced, the movement of someone who had done this before, and expected compliance through intimidation. "You know, Maya," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a seductive whisper, "I've been watching you. Your dedication, your attention to detail. A woman like you could go far in this man's army with the right kind of support." Maya's training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat level, immediate and escalating. Identify escape routes, blocked by his position. Evaluate options for de-escalation, rapidly diminishing. Her peripheral vision cataloged everything. Within reach, clipboard with metal edges, heavy-duty flashlight clipped to her belt, the proximity of various weapons secured behind locked glass. "Sir, I need to complete this inventory and file my report," Maya said, her voice steady but carrying a new edge of warning. "I'm sure you understand the importance of following proper procedures." Captain Steele laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "Procedures. You know what I love about procedures, Sergeant? They can be flexible when the right people are involved." His free hand moved to her shoulder, a contact that could be dismissed as casual in any official recounting, but felt like a brand against her skin through the fabric of her uniform. Maya shifted her weight slightly, a movement that appeared casual, but positioned her body for optimal leverage and balance. Years of combat training had taught her that the first few seconds of any confrontation were crucial, the moment when surprise and decisive action could overcome superior size and strength. "Captain Steele," Maya said, her tone becoming more formal and distant, "I believe there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of our professional relationship. Perhaps we should schedule a meeting with the first sergeant present to clarify any concerns about my performance. The mention of the first sergeant caused Captain Steele's expression to harden slightly. First Sergeant Rodriguez was a by-the-book NCO who had little patience for officers who didn't maintain proper professional boundaries. More importantly, he was one of the few senior personnel on base who had developed a reputation for taking harassment complaints seriously and following through with appropriate action. "I don't think that's necessary," Captain Steele replied, his grip tightening on Maya's shoulder. "This is just a conversation between colleagues. A friendly discussion about career opportunities and mutual benefits." Maya could smell the alcohol on his breath now, stronger than she had initially. Realized he had been drinking more than just a casual beer with dinner. This was someone who had been building up liquid courage for whatever he had planned. The realization made the situation significantly more dangerous, as intoxicated people were unpredictable and less likely to respond to reason or professional boundaries. "Sir, I think you may have had a few drinks this evening," Maya said carefully. "Perhaps it would be better if we continued this conversation when you're feeling more yourself." Captain Steele's eyes flashed with anger at the suggestion that he wasn't in complete control. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Sergeant. The question is whether you're smart enough to understand what's being offered to you here." His hand moved from her shoulder to her face, thumb brushing across her cheek in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate. Maya felt her body tense with revulsion and adrenaline, every instinct screaming at her to strike out, to create distance, to neutralize the threat through whatever means necessary. But she also understood the larger implications of her next actions. Captain Steele outranked her by 2 pay grades. He was well connected within the base power structure, known for his ability to advance the careers of officers he favored and destroy the futures of those who crossed him. Any physical confrontation would require her to justify her actions too. A system that historically sided with senior male officers over junior female enlisted personnel. "Captain, I need you to step back and maintain appropriate professional distance," Maya said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of someone issuing a direct order despite the disparity in their ranks. It was a calculated risk, challenging his authority while simultaneously documenting his violations of military protocol. Instead of stepping back, Captain Steele moved even closer, pressing his body against hers and pinning her against the weapon rack. The cold metal of rifle stocks pressed into her back while the heat of his body radiated against her chest. Maya could feel his heartbeat, elevated with arousal and alcohol, while his breath came faster with anticipation. "That's not how this works," he whispered, his lips nearly touching her ear. "You don't give me orders, Sergeant. I give orders to you. And right now, I'm ordering you to be very, very cooperative." Maya's mind raced through the legal and practical implications of her situation. If she submitted, she would be compromising everything she believed about dignity and self-respect, setting a precedent that would likely lead to escalating demands and increasingly degrading situations. But if she resisted physically, she would be attacking a superior officer, an offense that could result in court-martial and imprisonment, regardless of the circumstances that provoked it. The armory around them felt increasingly like a trap. Captain Steele had chosen this location deliberately, soundproof, isolated, secure from interruption. The very weapons that Maya maintained and protected were locked away behind glass and steel, leaving her dependent on her own physical capabilities and mental resources. "Captain Steele," Maya said, trying one final attempt at de-escalation, "I understand that you may have personal feelings, but acting on them would be inappropriate for both of us. Military regulations exist to protect everyone from situations that could damage careers and compromise unit effectiveness." Captain Steele's response was to press her more firmly against the weapon rack, his hands moving to her waist with clear intent. "Military regulations," he said with contempt, "are written by people who understand how the world really works. And the reality is that attractive young women like you have certain advantages that smart women learn to use for mutual benefit. Maya felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, the recognition that negotiation had failed, that Captain Steele had moved beyond the point where reason or appeal would influence his behavior. She was facing a predator who had convinced himself that his desires justified any action, that his rank provided immunity from consequences, and that her resistance was simply an obstacle to be overcome rather than a boundary to be respected. The sound of boots echoing in the corridor outside provided a moment of hope, but they passed by without stopping, their owner unaware of the drama unfolding behind the armory's sealed door. Maya realized that no rescue would come from external sources. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would depend entirely on her own actions and decisions. Captain Steele's hands began moving with increasing boldness, exploring areas that Maya had never permitted anyone to touch without explicit consent. The violation felt like acid burning through her skin, igniting every nerve with revulsion and rage. She had survived combat deployments, roadside bombs, and enemy fire, but this intimate assault felt more threatening to her core identity than any external danger she had faced. "Just relax," Captain Steele murmured, misinterpreting her stillness as submission. "This doesn't have to be difficult. Smart women understand that there are different ways to advance in the military. Your technical skills are impressive, but there are other skills that can be equally valuable to the right people." Maya's tactical mind continued operating, even as her emotional responses threatened to overwhelm her ability to think clearly. Captain Steele was larger and stronger, but he was also intoxicated and overconfident. His position pressed against her provided certain leverage opportunities, while his assumption of her compliance meant he wasn't fully prepared for determined resistance. More importantly, Maya realized that their location, while isolated from potential rescue, also provided certain advantages for someone trained in close-quarters combat. The narrow spaces between weapon racks would limit his ability to use his size advantage, while her familiarity with the room's layout gave her knowledge of potential weapons and obstacles that could be used defensively. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Captain Steele's hands moved to the buttons of Maya's uniform shirt, fumbling with the military standard fasteners while maintaining pressure against her body to prevent escape. Maya could feel his arousal pressing against her leg, could hear his breathing become more labored with anticipation. The clinical part of her mind noted these details while the emotional part of her psyche recoiled with disgust and determination. "Captain," Maya said, her voice now carrying a different quality, no longer pleading or negotiating, but cold and precise with the tone of someone who had made a final decision. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and maintain appropriate professional boundaries." Captain Steele paused in his assault on her uniform, perhaps finally recognizing something dangerous in her voice. For a moment, Maya thought he might step back, might recognize the line he was about to cross, and choose to retreat to safer ground. But then his expression hardened with the stubborn determination of someone who had invested too much in a course of action to change direction. "Or what?" he asked, his voice carrying what he intended as sexual menace, but which Maya recognized as the bluster of someone trying to convince himself as much as intimidate her. "You'll file a complaint? Report me to the chain of command? We both know how that story ends, Sergeant. Your word against mine, and I've got 20 years of unblemished service record backing up my credibility." Maya felt the last vestiges of hope for peaceful resolution evaporate like smoke in the desert wind. Captain Steele's threat crystallized. Everything she had learned about institutional protection and the price of seeking justice through official channels. His confidence wasn't misplaced. He did have 20 years of service, connections throughout the command structure, and the inherent credibility that the system afforded to senior male officers. But Maya also possessed something that Captain Steele had failed to account for in his calculations: 3 years of combat experience, extensive training in close-quarters combat, and the absolute certainty that submission would lead not to protection, but to escalating demands and increasing vulnerability. "You're right," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made Captain Steele pause in his assault on her uniform. "Official complaints rarely work out well for women in situations like this." Captain Steele smiled, interpreting her words as capitulation. "Now you're being smart. See, this doesn't have to be unpleasant. Cooperation can be very rewarding for everyone involved." His hands resumed their exploration of her body, moving with the confidence of someone who believed the battle was won. Maya allowed him to continue for precisely 3 seconds longer, using the time to calculate angles and leverage points, to position her body for optimal defensive action, to prepare for the kind of violence that would end the situation permanently. "But the thing about official complaints," Maya continued in the same quiet voice, "is that they're not the only way to handle problem officers." Captain Steele's hand stilled again, some primitive instinct finally recognizing the danger in her tone. He started to pull back, perhaps finally understanding that he had misjudged the woman he was assaulting. But Maya was already moving. Her right knee came up with all the force of 3 years of combat conditioning behind it, driving into Captain Steele's groin with precision and devastating effect. He doubled over with a strangled cry of pain, his hands reflexively moving to protect his injured anatomy, creating the opening that Maya needed to execute her next movement. Maya's elbow drove upward into Captain Steele's solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs in an explosive whoosh while simultaneously driving him backward. But she wasn't finished. Years of training had taught her that half measures in combat situations were often worse than inaction. If you were going to fight, you fought to win completely and decisively. As Captain Steele staggered backward, gasping for breath and clutching his groin, Maya stepped forward and grabbed his extended arm. The joint manipulation technique she applied was one she had learned from a Marine instructor during advanced combat training, a leverage-based move that used an opponent's own body weight and momentum against them. Captain Steele's shoulder separated with a sound like a branch breaking, followed immediately by his scream of pain and shock. He collapsed to his knees on the concrete floor, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, while his right hand continued to clutch his injured groin. Maya stepped back, her body still coiled for further action, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Captain Steele knelt on the floor between her and the door, no longer a threat, but still a problem that needed to be managed carefully. "You broke my shoulder," Captain Steele gasped, his voice high with pain and disbelief. "You attacked a superior officer. I'll have you court-martialed for this." Maya looked down at him with cold precision, her training allowing her to assess his injuries and threat level, even while her emotional responses processed what had just occurred. The shoulder dislocation was painful but not life-threatening. His other injuries would heal completely within a few days. But the psychological impact of being physically overpowered by someone he had attempted to victimize would likely last much longer. "Captain Steele," Maya said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had just shifted the balance of power in the room, "you're going to want to think very carefully about what story you tell about how you got injured." She moved too. The Armory's intercom system, the communication device that connected to the base's security office and duty personnel. Captain Steele watched her with growing alarm, perhaps finally understanding that the situation had moved far beyond his ability to control or contain. "Because the way I see it," Maya continued, her finger hovering over the emergency call button, "you have 2 choices. You can tell people that you tried to sexually assault a subordinate in an isolated location and she defended herself using appropriate force. Or you can tell people that you had an accident while conducting official business in the Armory." Captain Steele's face had gone pale, whether from pain or the realization of his predicament, Maya couldn't determine. But she could see him beginning to calculate the implications of either story, the way that each version would be received by his superiors and colleagues. "The first version," Maya said with clinical detachment, "results in an investigation that uncovers your history of inappropriate behavior with female personnel. I'm betting that once women feel safe to come forward, several stories will emerge that establish a pattern of predatory conduct. Your career ends in disgrace, you face possible criminal charges, and you spend the rest of your life known as the officer who couldn't keep his hands to himself." She paused, letting the implications sink in while Captain Steele continued to kneel on the floor, his breathing labored with pain and growing panic. "The second version," Maya continued, "results in you receiving medical treatment for your injuries, filing a brief accident report, and learning to conduct yourself with appropriate professional behavior going forward. Your career continues. Your reputation remains intact, and everyone moves on with their lives." Captain Steele stared at her with a mixture of pain and hatred, clearly struggling with the reality that his attempted victim had become his judge and jury. Maya could see him weighing his options, calculating the likelihood that he could successfully reframe the situation to his advantage. "You can't prove anything," Captain Steele said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's still your word against mine." Maya smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Actually, Captain, it's not. See, the Armory has security cameras." She gestured toward the discreet devices mounted near the ceiling, their red recording lights blinking steadily. "Everything that happened here tonight is documented in high-definition video with audio recording." Captain Steele's eyes followed her gesture upward, and Maya watched the color drain completely from his face as the implications hit him. She had been bluffing about the audio recording. The Armory's surveillance system only captured video. But his guilty conscience was filling in details that would make the footage even more incriminating than the reality. "The cameras show you entering the Armory after I was already here," Maya continued, pressing her advantage. "They show you approaching me, touching me without consent, pinning me against the weapon rack, and attempting to remove my clothing. They show me giving you multiple opportunities to step back and maintain professional boundaries. And they show you ignoring those warnings until I was forced to defend myself." The truth was more complex than Maya's description, but she understood that perception would matter more than precise accuracy in any subsequent investigation. Captain Steele had indeed entered the Armory after her, had indeed made unwanted physical contact, and had indeed persisted despite her clear verbal objections. The video would support her version of events far more convincingly than any story he might construct about consensual interaction gone wrong. "So here's what's going to happen," Maya said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had seized complete control of the situation. "You're going to tell anyone who asks that you slipped and fell while conducting official business in the Armory. You injured your shoulder and your pride, but nothing more serious than that. You'll seek appropriate medical treatment, file a brief accident report, and return to your normal duties with a renewed appreciation for proper safety procedures." Captain Steele opened his mouth to object, but Maya continued speaking before he could form words. "And going forward, you're going to conduct yourself with complete professional propriety toward all female personnel under your command. You're going to ensure that your interactions with women are witnessed by other personnel whenever possible. You're going to become a model officer when it comes to maintaining appropriate boundaries and treating subordinates with respect and dignity." Maya paused, studying Captain Steele's face to ensure that her message was being received and understood. His expression showed pain, humiliation, and the dawning realization that his position of authority had been permanently undermined by his own actions. Because if there are any future incidents, Maya said with quiet finality. "If any woman serving under your command experiences inappropriate behavior or feels pressured to compromise her dignity for career advancement, I will personally ensure that tonight's video footage finds its way to the appropriate investigators, along with a detailed accounting of your attempted assault." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and Captain Steele's labored breathing. Maya could see him processing the new reality of his situation, understanding that his previous immunity from consequences had been permanently revoked by his own overreach and her decisive response. Finally, Captain Steele nodded slightly, the movement sending a visible wave of pain through his injured shoulder. "Accident report," he said quietly. "Slipped and fell during official business." Maya nodded in acknowledgement, then moved to the intercom system. "This is Sergeant Chin in the Armory. I need a medic for Captain Steele. He's had an accident and appears to have injured his shoulder." The response was immediate. "Copy that. Sergeant Chun, medic team is en route. Estimated arrival in 3 minutes." Maya turned back to Captain Steele, who was still kneeling on the floor but had managed to brace himself against one of the weapon racks. His face was gray with pain, but she could see him beginning to construct the story he would tell about his injuries. "One more thing, Captain," Maya said as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. "I want you to understand something very clearly. What happened here tonight wasn't about your rank or my rank. It wasn't about military hierarchy or chain of command. It was about a man who thought he could take something that didn't belong to him, and a woman who refused to let that happen." The footsteps stopped outside the armory door, followed by the distinctive knock pattern used by medical personnel responding to emergency calls. Maya moved to unlock the door, but paused with her hand on the mechanism. "The medics are here," she said to Captain Steele. "Are you clear on what story you're telling them?" Captain Steele nodded again, his jaw clenched against the pain. "Accident. During official business. Slipped and fell." Maya opened the door to admit 2 medics, Corporal Williams and Specialist Martinez, both of whom she knew from previous interactions around the base. They entered with their medical bags and immediately assessed the situation. Injured officer on the floor, female sergeant standing nearby with no apparent injuries. "What happened?" Corporal Williams asked, moving to examine Captain Steele's shoulder, while Specialist Martinez began taking vital signs. "Captain Steele slipped and fell while we were conducting official business," Maya replied smoothly. "He landed badly and appears to have injured his shoulder. He was conscious and responsive throughout, but he's experiencing significant pain." Corporal Williams manipulated Captain Steele's arm gently, testing range of motion and checking for signs of fracture or nerve damage. "Looks like a dislocation," he announced. "We'll need to get you to the medical facility for x-rays and proper reduction." As the medics prepared Captain Steele for transport, Maya gathered her inventory sheets and clipboard, maintaining the appearance of someone who had simply been interrupted during routine duties by an unfortunate accident. She could feel Captain Steele's eyes on her, but when she glanced in his direction, his expression showed only pain and resignation. "Sergeant Chun," Corporal Williams said as they prepared to move Captain Steele to a stretcher. "Did you witness the accident?" Maya nodded. "Yes, I was conducting inventory when the captain entered to check on some equipment. He was moving between the weapon racks when he lost his footing and went down hard. I immediately called for medical assistance." The story was plausible, consistent with the physical evidence, and supported by Captain Steele's silence. More importantly, it provided a narrative that allowed everyone involved to maintain their dignity while ensuring that the real lesson of the evening, that predatory behavior would be met with decisive resistance, was clearly communicated. As the medics wheeled Captain Steele out of the armory, Maya completed her inventory and filed her report with mechanical precision. Her hands remained steady, her breathing controlled, her professional demeanor intact. But beneath the surface, she was processing the emotional and psychological impact of what had just occurred. She had been forced to use violence against a superior officer to protect herself from sexual assault. The action had been justified, necessary, and effective, but it had also crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Captain Steele would recover from his physical injuries, but their professional relationship and her relationship with the military hierarchy he represented had been permanently altered. Maya understood that word of the incident would spread through the base's informal communication networks, though the official story would likely obscure the true nature of what had happened. Some people would believe the accident report at face value. Others would read between the lines and draw their own conclusions about the confrontation between a female sergeant and a male captain that had resulted in his injury and her unscathed condition. But Maya also knew that her decisive action had sent a message that would resonate far beyond the walls of the Armory. Every woman serving under Captain Steele's command would benefit from his newfound understanding that inappropriate behavior carried serious consequences. Every predator on the base would think twice before assuming that female soldiers were easy targets for exploitation. As Maya secured the Armory and prepared to return to her quarters, she reflected on the path that had led to this moment. 3 years of careful vigilance, strategic positioning, and preparation had culminated in 90 seconds of decisive action that had permanently shifted the balance of power in her professional environment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. As Maya performed her final security check, their steady illumination revealing a room that looked exactly as it had an hour earlier. But Maya knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. She had crossed a threshold that separated victims from victors, had claimed a kind of power that could only be earned through courage and decisive action. The sound of her boots echoed in the empty corridor as Maya made her way back to the barracks, the weight of her service pistol familiar and reassuring against her hip. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and complications, but tonight she had proven to herself and to Captain Steele that some lines could not be crossed without consequences. The next morning arrived with the harsh clarity that follows traumatic events, when ordinary routines feel simultaneously familiar and strange. Maya woke at 05:45, 15 minutes before reveille, her internal clock as precise as ever despite having slept poorly. Her dreams had been filled with the sound of breaking bones and the weight of Captain Steele's body pressing against hers. Memory fragments that her unconscious mind struggled to process and file away. The barrack shower was empty at this early hour, allowing Maya to wash away the previous night's events in solitude. The hot water felt good against skin that still carried the phantom sensation of unwanted touches, while the familiar routine of military hygiene helped ground her in the present moment rather than the echo of violated boundaries. As she dressed in her daily duty uniform, Maya caught sight of herself in the small mirror above her sink. Her face showed no external signs of the previous night's confrontation, no bruises or scratches to mark her as someone who had recently engaged in physical combat. But her eyes held a different quality, a hardness that hadn't been there 24 hours earlier. The dining facility buzzed with the usual morning conversation as soldiers fueled themselves for another day of training and duty. Maya selected her breakfast with the same precision she applied to everything else: oatmeal for sustained energy, coffee for alertness, orange juice for vitamin C. She found a seat at a table near the windows, positioning herself where she could observe the room while maintaining clear sight lines to all exits. Corporal Davies joined her after a few minutes, sliding her tray across from Maya's with the easy familiarity of long friendship. Sarah's presence was comforting, a reminder that not all military relationships were complicated by predatory dynamics or power imbalances. "How was inventory duty last night?" Sarah asked, beginning to butter her toast with methodical strokes. "I saw the medics heading toward the Armory building around 2200. Everything okay?" Maya had prepared for this question, knowing that news of Captain Steele's injury would have spread through the base's informal communication networks by morning. Military bases were small communities where unusual events quickly became common. Knowledge, especially when they involved senior officers and medical emergencies. Captain Steele had an accident while checking on some equipment, Maya replied, her voice carrying just the right note of professional concern. Slipped and dislocated. His shoulder looked pretty painful. Sarah nodded sympathetically, but Maya caught something in her friend's expression, a flicker of interest that suggested she was reading between the lines of the official story. Sarah had developed the same instincts for detecting dangerous situations that Maya possessed, the same ability to recognize when official explanations didn't quite match the available evidence. "That's unfortunate," Sarah said carefully. "I hope he recovers quickly, though I imagine he'll be out of commission for a few days while his shoulder heals." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant First Class Thompson, a career NCO who served as the senior enlisted advisor for their unit. Thompson was a large man with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent 2 decades in military service, but Maya had always found him to be fair and professional in his dealings with subordinate personnel. "Ladies," Thompson said, setting his tray down at their table and joining the conversation. "I heard there was some excitement in the Armory last night. Captain Steele took a spill?" Maya repeated her account of the previous night's events, maintaining the same neutral tone and matter-of-fact delivery. Thompson listened without interruption, his experienced eyes studying Maya's face for signs of stress or deception. But Maya had learned to control her emotional responses during combat deployments, and her expression revealed nothing beyond appropriate concern for an injured colleague. "Unfortunate," Thompson said finally. "Captain Steele's going to be on light duty for at least a week while that shoulder heals. Dr. Martinez wants to make sure there's no nerve damage before clearing him for full activity." The news that Captain Steele would be temporarily removed from normal duties felt like a small victory to Maya, though she was careful not to let her satisfaction show. A week of limited interaction would provide time for the immediate tension to dissipate while establishing new patterns of professional behavior. "Any word on who's covering his responsibilities while he's recovering?" Sarah asked, her question carrying the practical concern of someone who needed to know which officers would be making decisions about duty assignments and training schedules. "Colonel Harrison is redistributing the workload among the other company commanders," Thompson replied. "Shouldn't affect day-to-day operations much, but there might be some schedule adjustments while we sort things out." As the breakfast conversation continued, Maya found herself studying the other soldiers in the dining facility with new awareness. How many of the women present had experienced unwanted attention from superior officers? How many had learned to navigate the complex dynamics of military hierarchy while protecting themselves from predatory behavior? How many had chosen to endure inappropriate conduct rather than risk career consequences by reporting it? The questions felt heavier now that Maya had crossed the line from potential victim to active resistance. She understood that her actions the previous night had implications beyond her own immediate safety. They had established a precedent that might influence how other women approached similar situations in the future. After breakfast, Maya reported to the motor pool for her assigned duties maintaining the unit's fleet of vehicles. The work was familiar and comforting, requiring the same attention to detail and technical precision that she brought to weapons maintenance. But even routine tasks felt different now, colored by the knowledge that she had permanently altered her relationship with the military power structure. Staff Sergeant Wilson, the motor pool supervisor, greeted Maya with his usual gruff efficiency. Wilson was one of the few senior NCOs on base who treated female soldiers exactly the same as their male counterparts, expecting competence, rewarding performance, and ignoring gender in favor of results. "Chun, I need you to run diagnostics on the Humvee that came back from training yesterday," Wilson said, handing her a clipboard with maintenance orders. Driver reported some unusual noises from the transmission. Could be nothing, but we can't afford to have vehicles breaking down during field exercises. Maya welcomed the technical challenge, immersing herself in the systematic process of identifying and resolving mechanical problems. The Humvee's transmission showed signs of wear that suggested improper shifting techniques, probably the result of inexperienced drivers who hadn't yet learned to respect the capabilities and limitations of military equipment. As she worked beneath the vehicle's hood, Maya became aware of approaching footsteps. She looked up to see Captain Morrison, one of the other company commanders, walking toward her with an expression that suggested official business rather than casual conversation. Captain Morrison was everything that Captain Steele was not. Professional, respectful, and known for treating subordinates with dignity, regardless of their gender or rank. Maya had worked with him on several occasions, and had always found their interactions to be appropriate and productive. "Sergeant Chun," Captain Morrison said, stopping beside the Humvee with his hands clasped behind his back in the formal posture of an officer conducting official business. "I understand you witnessed Captain Steele's accident last night." Maya straightened to attention, wiping her hands on a shop rag while maintaining appropriate military bearing. "Yes, sir. I was conducting inventory when the captain entered to check on some equipment. He slipped and fell, injuring his shoulder." Captain Morrison nodded, studying Maya's face with the careful attention of someone trained to read people and situations. "The medical report indicates a dislocated shoulder consistent with a fall. Dr. Martinez wanted to make sure there were no other factors involved that might affect Captain Steele's treatment or recovery." The question behind the question was clear enough. Was this really an accident? Or were there circumstances that might suggest alternative explanations for Captain Steele's injuries? Maya understood that Captain Morrison was giving her an opportunity to provide additional information if she chose to do so. "Captain Steele was moving between the weapon racks when he lost his footing," Maya replied, maintaining the same neutral tone she had used earlier. "The floor in that section of the armory can be slippery, especially if someone isn't watching their step carefully." Captain Morrison continued to study her for several seconds, his expression thoughtful. Maya had the impression that he was evaluating not just her words, but her demeanor, her body language, and the subtle cues that might suggest stress or deception. "I see," Captain Morrison said finally. "Well, accidents happen, even to experienced officers. The important thing is that appropriate medical attention was provided and proper reports were filed." He paused, and Maya sensed that he was considering whether to say something more. When he continued, his tone carried a slightly different quality, less official, more personal. "Sergeant Chun, you've been an exemplary soldier during your time with this unit. Your performance evaluations are consistently outstanding. Your technical skills are exceptional, and your leadership potential has been noted by multiple superior officers." Maya felt a flutter of uncertainty about where this conversation was heading. Praise from senior officers could be genuine recognition of competence, but it could also be the prelude to uncomfortable requests or inappropriate propositions. "Thank you, sir," Maya replied carefully. "I try to maintain the highest standards in all aspects of my service." "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss," Captain Morrison said. "There's an opportunity coming up that might interest you. The Army is looking for qualified NCOs to attend the Advanced Leadership course at Fort Benning. It's a competitive program that leads to promotion opportunities and increased responsibilities." The offer was unexpected and genuinely appealing. The Advanced Leadership course was a prestigious program that could significantly advance Maya's military career while providing valuable training in management and tactical leadership. More importantly, it would remove her from the current base environment for several months, providing distance from the complications created by the previous night's confrontation. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity, sir," Maya said, unable to completely hide her interest. What would be the timeline for something like that? The next class starts in 6 weeks, Captain Morrison replied. I would need to submit your application by the end of this week, along with my recommendation and supporting documentation from your performance evaluations. Maya felt a surge of excitement tempered by the practical realization that such opportunities rarely came without strings attached. In her experience, unexpected career advancement often carried hidden costs or obligations that weren't immediately apparent. May I ask why you're considering me for this program, sir? Maya asked, trying to determine whether the offer was related to her technical competence or the previous night's incident with Captain Steele. Captain Morrison smiled, and for the first time in the conversation, his expression seemed completely genuine. Because you're exactly the kind of soldier the Army needs in leadership positions. You're technically competent, professionally dedicated, and you demonstrate the kind of integrity that inspires confidence in subordinates and superiors alike. The praise felt genuine, but Maya caught something in Captain Morrison's phrasing that suggested additional layers of meaning. The emphasis on integrity seemed particularly significant, as if he understood more about the previous night's events than the official accident report would suggest. I would be honored to be considered for the program, sir, Maya said, making the decision to trust Captain Morrison's intentions while remaining alert for any signs that her trust was misplaced. Excellent, Captain Morrison replied. I'll begin preparing the paperwork today. The selection process is competitive, but I believe you have a strong chance of acceptance based on your record and qualifications. As Captain Morrison walked away, Maya found herself processing the implications of their conversation. The timing of the leadership course opportunity, coming less than 24 hours after her confrontation with Captain Steele, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. But whether it represented genuine recognition of her potential or a strategic move to remove her from a potentially problematic situation, the end result would be beneficial for her career and personal safety. Maya returned to her work on the Humvee's transmission, but her mind continued analyzing the morning's interactions. Captain Morrison's offer suggested that word of the previous night's incident had reached higher levels of the command structure, though the official story appeared to be holding. More importantly, it indicated that at least some senior officers were taking steps to ensure that talented female soldiers had opportunities for advancement and professional development. The transmission repair required replacing several worn components and adjusting the linkage mechanisms that controlled gear. Selection. Maya found the methodical process of disassembly and reconstruction soothing, a welcome contrast to the emotional complexity of navigating military politics and interpersonal relationships. As she worked, other soldiers passed through the motor pool on various errands and assignments. Maya noticed that several people glanced in her direction with what seemed like heightened interest, though no one approached her directly. Word of Captain Steele's injury had clearly spread, and people were drawing their own conclusions about the circumstances involved. Specialist Rodriguez, a young woman who worked in the communications section, stopped by the motor pool around mid-morning with a clipboard full of maintenance requests. Maya had worked with Rodriguez on several occasions and had always found her to be competent and professional. Sergeant Chun, Rodriguez said, approaching with what appeared to be casual business, but speaking in a tone that suggested more personal interest. I heard Captain Steele had an accident last night. Hope he's okay. Maya repeated her standard account of the incident, maintaining the same neutral tone and factual delivery. But Rodriguez's response suggested that she was reading between the lines of the official story. That's unfortunate, Rodriguez said carefully. Well, I have to say, Captain Steele always struck me as someone who might be prone to accidents, especially when he's around female personnel without proper supervision. The comment was subtle but unmistakable in its implications. Rodriguez was indicating that she understood the real nature of the previous night's confrontation while maintaining plausible deniability about explicitly stating her suspicions. "Accidents can happen to anyone," Maya replied diplomatically. "The important thing is that appropriate medical care was provided and proper procedures were followed." Rodriguez nodded, but her expression conveyed understanding that went beyond Maya's carefully neutral words. "Absolutely. It's good to know that women in this unit can handle themselves appropriately when unexpected situations arise." The conversation continued for several more minutes, touching on routine maintenance issues and scheduling concerns. But Maya understood that the real communication had already occurred. Rodriguez was expressing support and solidarity, while acknowledging the constraints that prevented more direct discussion of sensitive topics. Similar interactions occurred throughout the day as Maya moved through her assigned duties. People approached with seemingly routine business, but managed to convey deeper messages through carefully chosen words and meaningful glances. The pattern suggested that news of Captain Steele's accident had been interpreted correctly by at least some members of the base community, and that Maya's actions were being viewed favorably by those who understood the real situation. By afternoon, Maya had completed her assigned maintenance tasks and was preparing to return to the armory for additional inventory duties. The prospect of entering the room where the previous night's confrontation had occurred felt daunting, but she understood the importance of maintaining normal routines and professional demeanor. The armory felt different when Maya unlocked the door and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights hummed with the same steady tone, the weapon racks stood in their usual perfect alignment, and the concrete floor showed no signs of the previous night's violence. But Maya could still feel the echo of what had happened, the memory of fear and determination that had culminated in Captain Steele's injury and her own transformation. She moved through the room systematically, checking security measures and verifying that all equipment remained properly secured. The spot where Captain Steele had fallen was unmarked, giving no indication that a significant confrontation had occurred there less than 24 hours earlier. As Maya worked, she found herself thinking about the other women serving on the base, wondering how many of them had faced similar situations and chosen different responses. How many had submitted to unwanted advances rather than risk career consequences? How many had left military service rather than continue navigating an environment where predatory behavior was tolerated or ignored? The questions felt heavier now that Maya understood the full implications of resistance. Her actions had been necessary and justified, but they had also crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. She had used violence against a superior officer, regardless of the circumstances. That had made such action necessary. But Maya also understood that her decisive response had created space for other women to resist similar treatment. Captain Steele's injury and humiliation had sent a message throughout the command structure that inappropriate behavior carried serious risks, even for senior officers who believed themselves immune from consequences. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside interrupted Maya's contemplation. She looked up to see Corporal Davies entering the armory with a concerned expression on her face. "Maya," Sarah said, closing the door behind her and ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "I need to talk to you about something important." Maya sat down her clipboard and gave her friend complete attention. Sarah's tone suggested serious business rather than casual conversation, and Maya had learned to trust her friend's judgment about potentially dangerous situations. "What's going on?" Maya asked, moving closer so they could speak quietly. Sarah glanced around the armory, her eyes stopping briefly on the spot where Captain Steele had fallen. When she looked back at Maya, her expression was grave but also held a quality that might have been admiration. "I've been hearing things," Sarah said carefully. "Conversations in the women's quarters, comments from other female personnel. Word is getting around about what really happened here last night." Maya felt a chill of apprehension. If the true nature of the confrontation was becoming common knowledge, It could create complications that would be difficult to manage through official channels. What kind of things are you hearing? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. People are saying that Captain Steele finally picked the wrong woman to mess with, Sarah replied. They're saying that someone finally stood up to him and made him pay for his behavior. The words confirmed Maya's fears about the spread of unofficial information, but they also contained an element that surprised her. Rather than expressing concern about her use of violence against a superior officer, people seemed to be viewing her actions as justified and necessary. Sarah, Maya said carefully, I need you to understand something. What happened last night was an accident. Captain Steele slipped and fell while conducting official business. That's the only story that matters, and it's the only story that can protect everyone involved. Sarah studied Maya's face for several seconds, clearly understanding the gap between official truth and actual events. When she spoke again, her voice carried complete conviction. Maya, I've known you for 3 years. I've seen you handle combat situations, deal with difficult people, and navigate every kind of challenge this place can throw at you. If Captain Steele got hurt while he was alone with you in a secured room, I'm absolutely certain that he deserved whatever happened to him. The vote of confidence felt like a weight lifting from Maya's shoulders. Sarah's support meant that at least one person understood the true nature of the situation and approved of her response to it. The thing is, Sarah continued, you're not the only woman who's had problems with Captain Steele. There are stories going back months, maybe longer. Women who've been cornered, pressured, threatened with career consequences if they didn't cooperate. Maya felt anger building in her chest as she processed the implications of Sarah's words. If Captain Steele had a history of predatory behavior, then her confrontation with him was part of a larger pattern of abuse that had been tolerated by the military hierarchy. Why didn't anyone report him? Maya asked, though she already suspected the answer. Same reason most women don't report harassment, Sarah replied. Who are you going to complain to? His superior officers? The same system that promoted him to captain despite his behavior. The military justice system that consistently sides with senior male officers over junior female personnel. The questions highlighted the systemic nature of the problem that Maya had confronted the previous night. Individual acts of resistance were necessary but insufficient to address institutional tolerance for predatory behavior. But here's the thing, Sarah said, her voice taking on a different quality. Your situation last night has changed the conversation. Women are talking about fighting back instead of just enduring. They're talking about refusing to accept inappropriate behavior as the price of military service. Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her personal act of self-defense had become a symbol of resistance for other women facing similar challenges. The realization was both empowering and daunting. What are you saying, Sarah? Maya asked, though she was beginning to understand the implications of her friend's words. I'm saying that you've given other women permission to defend themselves, Sarah replied. You've shown that predators like Captain Steele aren't untouchable, that there are consequences for crossing certain lines. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the armory door opening. Both women turned to see First Sergeant Rodriguez entering with his characteristic purposeful stride. Rodriguez was known throughout the unit as a fair but demanding leader who held everyone to the same high standards regardless of rank or position. Ladies, Rodriguez said, his tone suggesting official business. Sergeant Chun, I need to speak with you privately about last night's incident. Sarah excused herself quickly. Leaving Maya alone with the senior NCO, Rodriguez waited until the door closed behind Corporal Davies before speaking again. Sergeant Chun, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of years of military experience. I've reviewed the incident reports from last night, spoken with the medical personnel who treated Captain Steele, and had conversations with several people about the circumstances involved. Maya maintained her professional bearing while her mind raced through possible implications of Rodriguez's investigation. The first sergeant was known for his thoroughness and integrity, qualities that made him both respected and sometimes feared. Among the enlisted personnel. "Yes, First Sergeant," Maya replied, keeping her voice steady and respectful. Rodriguez moved deeper into the armory, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced attention of someone trained to notice details that others might miss. He stopped near the spot where Captain Steele had fallen, though Maya doubted he could identify the specific location without prior knowledge. The official report indicates that Captain Steele suffered a dislocated shoulder as the result of an accidental fall, Rodriguez said, his tone carefully neutral. Medical examination confirmed injuries consistent with that explanation. Maya nodded but remained silent, understanding that Rodriguez was building towards something more significant than a simple review of paperwork. However, Rodriguez continued, turning to face Maya directly, there are some aspects of the situation that warrant additional discussion. The timing, the location, the circumstances that brought both of you to the armory after normal duty hours. The implications of his words hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Maya realized that Rodriguez had likely pieced together the real nature of the previous night's confrontation, but was approaching the subject with the careful diplomacy required when official truth and actual events diverged. "First Sergeant," Maya said carefully, "I was conducting quarterly inventory as assigned." Captain Steele entered to check on equipment status. The accident occurred while he was moving between weapon racks. Rodriguez studied her face with the intense scrutiny of someone trained to read people under stress. Maya met his gaze directly, drawing on years of combat experience to maintain composure while under examination. "Sergeant Chun," Rodriguez said finally, "in my 23 years of military service, I've learned that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that happen between the lines of official reports." He paused, and Maya sensed that he was giving her an opportunity to provide additional information if she chose to do so. But she also understood that anything she said beyond the official account could create complications that would be difficult to manage. "I've also learned," Rodriguez continued, "that good soldiers sometimes find themselves in situations where they have to make split-second decisions about protecting themselves and their fellow service members. When those decisions prove to be correct, smart leaders find ways to support their people without creating unnecessary complications." Maya felt a surge of relief as she began to understand Rodriguez's position. He was indicating support for her actions while maintaining the fiction necessary to protect everyone involved from institutional consequences. "First Sergeant," Maya said, choosing her words carefully, "I've always tried to conduct myself with appropriate military bearing and professional standards. If situations arise that test those standards, I believe in responding with whatever measures are necessary to maintain good order and discipline." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I expect from NCOs in this unit. The ability to assess threats, make decisive judgments, and take appropriate action to protect mission effectiveness and personnel safety." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the armory door. Rodriguez called for entry, and Captain Morrison stepped inside with an expression that suggested coordination between the two senior leaders. "First Sergeant, Sergeant Chun," Captain Morrison said, acknowledging both of them with professional courtesy. "I hope I'm not interrupting important business." "Actually, Captain," Rodriguez replied, "your timing is perfect. I was just discussing with Sergeant Chen the importance of recognizing exceptional performance and ensuring that our best people have opportunities for professional development." Maya realized that she was witnessing a carefully orchestrated conversation between leaders who had already discussed her situation and reached conclusions about how to handle it. The recognition was both reassuring and slightly overwhelming. "Excellent," Captain Morrison said, his tone suggesting satisfaction with Rodriguez's assessment. Sergeant Chen, I've submitted your application for the Advanced Leadership course at Fort Benning. Based on First Sergeant Rodriguez's recommendation and your outstanding performance record, I'm confident you'll be accepted into the program. The news felt surreal to Maya, as if the events of the previous 24 hours had accelerated her career trajectory in ways she had never expected. The leadership course represented exactly the kind of opportunity she had hoped to earn through years of dedicated service. "Thank you, sir," Maya said, struggling to process the rapid sequence of developments. "I'm honored by your confidence and the opportunity to represent the unit in advanced training." Rodriguez and Captain Morrison exchanged a look that suggested shared understanding about matters beyond Maya's immediate awareness. When Rodriguez spoke again, his tone carried additional weight. "Sergeant Chun, there's one more matter we need to discuss. It's come to my attention that there may have been ongoing issues with certain personnel in positions of authority. Issues that have created challenging working conditions for some of our female service members." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she realized the conversation was moving toward more sensitive territory. Rodriguez was apparently prepared to address the broader pattern of behavior that had culminated in the previous night's confrontation. "If such issues exist," Rodriguez continued, "it's important that they be addressed through appropriate channels to ensure that all personnel can serve with dignity and professional respect. Sometimes that requires leadership to take proactive steps to modify assignments, adjust responsibilities, or implement additional oversight measures." Captain Morrison nodded in agreement. "We've been reviewing command structures and supervisory relationships to identify areas where improvements might enhance unit effectiveness and personnel satisfaction. Some changes may be implemented over the coming weeks." Maya began to understand that her confrontation with Captain Steele had triggered a broader review of command policies and personnel management. The leadership was taking steps to address systemic issues rather than treating her situation as an isolated incident. "In the meantime," Rodriguez said, "we want to ensure that all personnel understand that inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated, regardless of rank or position. Anyone who believes they've been subjected to harassment or unprofessional conduct should feel confident that reports will be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly." The message was clear. The tolerance for predatory behavior that had protected officers like Captain Steele was being officially revoked. Maya's decisive response had created an opportunity for institutional change that went far beyond her individual situation. "First Sergeant," Maya said, feeling compelled to acknowledge the support she was receiving, "I want you to know that I appreciate the unit's commitment to maintaining professional standards and protecting all personnel." "Sergeant Chun," Rodriguez replied, "you've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and integrity that we need at every level of this organization. Your actions reflect credit on yourself, your rank, and this entire unit." Captain Morrison consulted his watch and indicated that he needed to attend another meeting. "Sergeant Chen will have more details about the leadership course timeline within the next few days. In the meantime, continue with your assigned duties and maintain the high standards you've consistently demonstrated." As the two senior leaders prepared to leave the Armory, Rodriguez turned back to Maya with a final comment. "Sergeant Chun, sometimes the most important battles are fought by individuals who refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. When those battles are won through courage and decisive action, they create opportunities for positive change that benefit everyone who serves." Maya understood that Rodriguez was acknowledging her confrontation with Captain Steele while expressing appreciation for the broader impact of her actions. The validation felt profound, especially coming from a senior NCO whose opinion carried significant weight throughout the unit. After Rodriguez and Captain Morrison left, Maya found herself alone in the Armory with a flood of conflicting emotions. Relief at receiving institutional support, pride in having her actions validated by senior leadership, and anxiety about the broader implications of becoming a symbol of resistance against harassment. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her contemplation. Maya looked up to see Staff Sergeant Williams, a female NCO who worked in the administrative section. Williams was known for her competence and professionalism, but Maya had never had extensive personal interaction with her. "Sergeant Chun," Williams said, entering the armory with an expression that combined professional courtesy with something more personal. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to speak with you privately." Maya gestured for Williams to enter, curious about what had prompted this unexpected visit. Williams moved deeper into the room and turned to face Maya directly, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "I heard about Captain Steele's accident last night," Williams said, her tone carrying subtle emphasis that suggested she understood more than the official report would indicate. Word travels fast in a place like this, especially when it involves senior officers and unusual circumstances. Maya maintained her neutral expression while trying to gauge Williams' intentions. The staff sergeant's approach seemed supportive, but Maya had learned to be cautious about revealing too much to people whose motivations were entirely clear. "Yes, it was unfortunate," Maya replied diplomatically. "I hope he recovers quickly from his injuries." Williams studied Maya's face for several seconds before responding. "Sergeant Chun, I want you to know that there are quite a few women on this base who are grateful for what happened last night, even if they can't express that gratitude publicly." The statement was more direct than Maya had expected, clearly indicating that Williams understood the real nature of the confrontation with Captain Steele. Maya felt a mixture of validation and concern about how widely the truth had spread. "I'm not sure what you mean, Staff Sergeant," Maya said carefully. "Captain Steele had an accident during official business. That's all that happened." Williams smiled, but her expression conveyed understanding rather than skepticism about Maya's official account. "Of course, and that accident happened to occur during a situation where Captain Steele was alone with a female soldier in an isolated location after normal duty hours." The implication was clear enough that Maya couldn't maintain complete denial, but she also couldn't afford to explicitly confirm Williams' interpretation of events. "Staff Sergeant," Maya said, "I think it's important that we all focus on official reports and documented facts rather than speculation or rumors." "Absolutely," Williams agreed. "But I also think it's important that you understand the impact your accident response has had on other women in this unit. For the first time in months, we're hearing conversations about standing up for ourselves, instead of just trying to avoid problematic situations." Maya felt the weight of responsibility that came with becoming an inadvertent symbol of resistance. Her personal act of self-defense had apparently inspired other women to reconsider their own approaches to handling harassment and inappropriate behavior. "What kind of conversations?" Maya asked, despite her better judgment about maintaining distance from potentially sensitive topics. Williams moved closer, lowering her voice to ensure their discussion remained private. "Conversations about refusing to accept inappropriate comments as normal workplace behavior. Conversations about documenting incidents instead of just hoping they'll stop. Conversations about supporting each other when someone decides to file official complaints." The description painted a picture of women who were moving from individual endurance to collective resistance, inspired by Maya's example of decisive action against a predatory officer. "That sounds like positive change," Maya said carefully. "Everyone deserves to work in an environment free from harassment and inappropriate behavior." This powerful military fiction follows the remarkable journey of Maya Chun, a dedicated soldier whose single act of courage against harassment transforms not only her own career, but catalyzes systemic change throughout the military institution she serves. Our story begins with Maya Chun as a sergeant working in the Armory, 3 years into her military service. She's built a reputation for technical competence and professionalism, carefully navigating the complex dynamics of military life while maintaining her integrity. Maya's closest friend, Sarah Davies, provides emotional support as they both face the daily challenges of being women in a male-dominated environment. The pivotal moment arrives when Captain Steele, a predatory officer with a history of inappropriate behavior toward female personnel, corners Maya in the armory during evening inventory duties. What begins as unwanted advances quickly escalates into a threatening situation that forces Maya to make a split-second decision that will change everything. Rather than submit to harassment or retreat in fear, Maya confronts Captain Steele directly and decisively. Her response is swift, appropriate, and effective. She refuses to be victimized and makes it clear that his behavior will have consequences. This confrontation, lasting less than 5 minutes, becomes the catalyst for transformative change that ripples throughout the entire military structure. Word of Maya's confrontation with Captain Steele spreads quickly through the base's informal networks. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had been planning to leave military service rather than continue enduring harassment, approaches Maya to express her admiration and gratitude. This conversation reveals the broader scope of the harassment problem and the impact Maya's actions have had on other women. Williams shares that multiple women have experienced problems with various male personnel on the base, and Maya's decisive response has given them permission to fight back when fighting back becomes necessary. The recognition that her individual act of self-defense has empowered others both energizes and humbles Maya. As she begins to understand the broader implications of her choices, the institutional response is swift and significant. Within 3 weeks, Maya receives acceptance to the Advanced Leadership course, an opportunity that will accelerate her career trajectory and provide her with enhanced authority to influence military culture and policy. Colonel Harrison, a respected leader known for his integrity and fair treatment of all personnel, meets with Maya to discuss her upcoming training assignment. During this conversation, he reveals the comprehensive policy changes that have been implemented in response to the ongoing efforts to improve unit effectiveness, carefully avoiding direct reference to Maya's confrontation while acknowledging its catalytic role. The reforms are substantial and meaningful. Captain Steele has been transferred to a staff position with minimal supervision of enlisted personnel. New reporting mechanisms allow personnel to file complaints directly with the Inspector General's office. Mandatory training for supervisory personnel regarding appropriate professional conduct has been implemented. A victim advocate coordinator position has been created, with Staff Sergeant Williams selected for this role. Zero tolerance policies for harassment have been established with enhanced oversight measures. These changes represent exactly the kind of systematic reform Maya had hoped might result from her individual act of resistance. The recognition that her confrontation with Captain Steele has contributed to positive change for other women provides profound satisfaction and validates her decision to fight back. As Maya prepares to leave for the Advanced Leadership course at Fort Benning, she experiences the complex emotions that come with major life transitions. Her friendship with Sarah Davies provides stability and support as they both recognize that their separation is temporary and their bond strong enough to survive the challenges of different career paths. The farewell conversations with colleagues reveal the impact Maya's actions have had on military culture. Staff Sergeant Williams shares that 3 additional women have come forward with complaints about inappropriate behavior from different officers, feeling confident for the first time that their reports will be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Williams' final visit to Maya's quarters before departure carries particular emotional weight. She reveals that she had been planning to leave military service entirely before Maya's confrontation with Captain Steele demonstrated that resistance was possible and institutional support existed for women who refused to accept inappropriate treatment. You've proven that individual courage can catalyze institutional change, Williams tells Maya, highlighting the broader significance of what began as simple self-defense. At Fort Benning, Maya excels in the intensive leadership training program that challenges her academically, physically, and professionally. The course prepares her for increased responsibilities and command positions that will allow her to influence military culture and policy on a broader scale. Colonel Patricia Vance, the course commandant, emphasizes the evolving nature of military leadership and the importance of creating inclusive environments where all service members can contribute effectively to mission success. Maya listens with particular attention to discussions about zero-tolerance policies for harassment and the responsibility of leaders to model appropriate professional behavior. Upon graduation, Maya receives promotion to Sergeant First Class and orders to Fort Campbell as a senior instructor in the non-commissioned officer education system. This assignment represents exactly the kind of opportunity that allows her to influence military culture more broadly, training junior leaders and developing curriculum focused on professional military education and ethical leadership principles. At Fort Campbell, Maya's office becomes a hub for mentorship and guidance. The walls display certificates from various professional development programs, and her desk holds curriculum materials for courses on ethical leadership, conflict resolution, and creating inclusive work environments. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, a recent officer candidate school graduate, seeks Maya's guidance regarding inappropriate behavior from her platoon sergeant. This mentoring session illustrates the ongoing nature of harassment challenges while demonstrating how institutional changes have provided better resources and support systems for addressing such problems. Maya's approach combines practical guidance with strategic thinking, helping Martinez develop appropriate strategies for documentation, reporting, and establishing clear professional boundaries. The conversation reflects the gradual but persistent changes Maya has observed in military culture. Women are reporting harassment more frequently, investigations are being conducted more thoroughly, and consequences for inappropriate behavior are becoming more consistent and meaningful. 2 years later, Maya's promotion to Master Sergeant takes place with her parents in attendance for the first time since her initial enlistment. Elena and David Chun witnessed their daughter's recognition ceremony while meeting colleagues and students, who describe her impact on numerous women navigating challenging military careers. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez tells Maya's parents that their daughter has become something of a legend among female soldiers, with a reputation for providing practical guidance and unwavering support for anyone facing difficult situations. This recognition helps Elena, who had long worried about her daughter's chosen career path, finally understand that Maya's military service contributes to positive change rather than simply exposing her to unnecessary danger. The promotion provides Maya with increased authority to influence policy and culture within the military education system, including developing leadership curricula for senior NCO courses and providing guidance to commanding officers about personnel management and organizational climate issues. 3 years after her initial confrontation with Captain Steele, Maya finds herself in the Pentagon as one of 12 senior NCOs selected to provide input on sexual assault prevention and response policy changes. The conference room discussion, led by General Patricia Collins, focuses on implementation strategies and training requirements for military-wide reforms. The statistics presented show measurable improvement in reporting rates and conviction rates for sexual assault cases, documenting the gradual but persistent progress in addressing military sexual violence. Maya contributes insights from her work training junior leaders and developing educational programs, sharing observations about proactive strategies for preventing inappropriate behavior rather than simply responding to it after the fact. Maya Chun's journey from a sergeant defending herself in an armory to a master sergeant influencing policy at the Pentagon illustrates the profound impact that individual courage can have on institutional culture. Her story demonstrates that Resistance to harassment and predatory behavior is not only possible, but can catalyze systematic reforms that protect and empower countless others. The narrative reveals how one person's refusal to accept inappropriate treatment can inspire others to find their own strength and courage, while creating institutional changes that make such courage more likely to succeed. Maya's transformation. From someone who carefully avoided problematic situations to someone who confronted threats directly and decisively reflects the kind of leadership development that military service at its best can provide. Her story continues to inspire women throughout the military to report harassment, seek mentorship, and refuse to accept inappropriate behavior as the price of service. From her initial 5-minute confrontation with Captain Steele to her ongoing work developing policy at the national level, Maya Shin exemplifies how individual acts of resistance can create lasting positive change that extends far beyond personal circumstances. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this powerful story of courage, leadership, and institutional change. If you found Maya Chun's journey inspiring and want to explore more compelling narratives about resilience, personal growth, and making a difference in the world, please subscribe to stay connected with future content. Your subscription helps us continue sharing stories that matter and celebrating the kind of individual courage that can transform entire institutions. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of readers who believe in the power of standing up for what's right.